Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. I don't know where you're joining us from, but here in Snohomish, it's pretty nice and sunny. If you want, please tell us on the chat, where are you joining us from? Why are you joining? And what's your level of expertise on FAFSA, WASFA? 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. We're going to give participants 1 more minute to join, and then we'll get started. Can everybody hear me okay? Hi, Carrie. Hi, Karen. Great. Basin City, Spokane, Seattle Public Schools. Awesome. Okay, I think I want to honor your time. And so I think we should, if I can stop the music now, start the presentation. Oh, thank you, Griselia. Okay, so having said that, here are your presenters today.
Hi everyone, my name is Griselia Calderon Sandoval and I'm a program officer in the Scholarships and Financial Aid Education Department at the College Success Foundation. I'm a daughter of farm workers and a DACA recipient, and when I went to school, I relied mainly on scholarships to pay for my education. And while I was in school, I advocated for state aid to be made available to undocumented students, given that our families were paying taxes and contributing to the state economy. So today we have more options and more resources for more students to go to school. And last year when I was in a different position, I used this trainings to get prepared for the financial aid season. I would often go back to them and review them. I hope you do the same. And thank you for being here this afternoon with us.
Good afternoon again. My name is Maria Rebecki, and I'm the Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid Education. I myself was once a first-generation low-income student, immigrant English language learner, and had it not been for financial aid, I wouldn't be here today. Also, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for individuals like you that taught me how to navigate the college and financial aid application processes. I was very lucky that my very first work study position was in a financial aid office. So I really got to learn how it worked. And although I didn't go to college intending on having a career in financial aid, that very first work study position really opened the door for me to build a career that has been incredibly rewarding and impactful. And so I spent 2 decades working in financial aid offices at 2-year colleges and 4-year universities. And now in the last decade, I chose to get all that knowledge that I gained over the years and put it to work in the nonprofit world and trying to make financial aid accessible, understandable, and a little bit less scary for practitioners like you, and also students and families that are first starting to navigate this very complex and intrusive process. So I feel very thankful to be able to do this work now. So our hope today is to, I always say, excuse me, that learning financial aid is like learning a new language. You will not be fluent at the end of this 1.5 hour session, but we hope at least to lay a good foundation for you and to develop a good relationship with you so that you feel that you can reach out to us whenever you have questions or you need to troubleshoot a student circumstances, or if you're preparing, an event at your school and you would like for one of us to come and present or help you in some way or another, we are here to help you do exactly that. I want to make sure to mention that today is part 1 of a 2-part series that we're doing on FAFSA WASFA. The second part is going to be this Thursday at 10 a.m. And it's a session that we put together with 14 case studies. So these are all students and families cases that came from many of you working in the field every day, and that we have seen over and over again. So we think that although they're a little bit more difficult to navigate, they're very common life experiences for our students and families. So I hope you're able to join us. We are recording this session, and we will record also Tuesday session, and we'll share those recordings with you as well as this PowerPoint. So, don't worry that you'll have access to all these resources. We are building a second part of the Financial Aid Hub. If you're familiar with the Financial Aid Hub on the CSF website right now, all the content we have is geared towards students and they're supporting adults, but we are right now in the process of creating a practitioner site where we're going to upload recordings, PowerPoints, tools that we have developed or vetted, so that you can do this work hopefully in a little bit in an easier way. Okay, so a couple of suggestions for the webinar. Please don't be afraid to ask questions. We know how complicated financial aid can be and confusing. So the minute you get lost, please raise your hand or put your question on the chat. Let us know where you got lost so that we can clarify. One thing I would ask you is please try not to get ahead, because probably the question you ask, we are going to cover it at some point. What happened to us at the last session is we were getting so many questions ahead of time is that we went really over time. We went way over the 1.5 hours we had allotted. So hold your question, write it down in case we don't address it. But yes, it's important that you don't get lost along the way. You're going to see an orange bubble that looks like this throughout the presentation. Those are the areas where we most commonly see mistakes being made by students and families. So make sure to make a note of it. And last but not least, we are going to be covering some changes that are coming up for next year. So we'll cover that at the end of the presentation. Okay.
Now let's review objectives. So at the end of this presentation, you will be able to guide students to identify which financial aid form to complete, understand dependency status, know what documents students will need. You will be able to help students set up their logins and accounts. We will review the FAFSA and WASFA forms, and we will tell you how to avoid common mistakes and how to address special circumstances, and how students can prepare for the next steps in the financial aid process. We will also share what is new for the 23-24 academic year. We will be reviewing 9 sections. That is about 55 slides. There's a lot of information packed here. This video will be recorded and sent out in about a week, so you will have more time to review the slides and presentation.
Thank you, Criselia. Okay, let's dive in. So which form should each student complete? So the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid and should be completed by students who are either U.S. citizens, U.S. nationals, so like those born in American Samoa or Swain Islands, students who are U.S. permanent residents or green card holders, right? Students that have an I-94, which is a rectangular card, if you want, that is stapled to the passport when the individual enters the United States at any point of entry, with a stamp designating them as refugee, asylum granted, Cuban Haitian entrant, conditional entrant, or parolee. Also, students that have received their immigrant visa through the Violence Against Women's Act or VAWA program, and students that have a T or T1 visa. So those students that can say yes to any one of these designations should complete a FAFSA. We'll talk about the caveats in a minute. The other form that students could complete, remember that students will complete one, but not both, is the WASFA, or the Washington Application for State Financial Aid. And this form is a form that students who cannot file or do not wish to file a federal FAFSA can complete. Who are those students? So students who are undocumented, students who have DACA, even if their DACA is currently expired, they can still complete the WASFA. Other non-citizens, and they would have to check with the individual college or university to see if they are labeled as such. Students that have defaulted or have a balance on a federal loan or grant, they may choose to complete a WASFA instead. Students who don't feel comfortable completing the FAFSA. So for example, students like the one in the poll, right, who the student himself is a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident, but their parents are not, and they do not want to expose their parents' information on a federal form, they can choose to complete the WASFA. What's important for them to know is that by doing that, they will be foregoing federal financial aid. So students that complete a WASFA will only qualify or be considered for state financial aid, so Washington state financial aid, institutional aid, so aid that comes from the college or university, or private organizations like College Success Foundation that offers private scholarships, for example. So it's important for them to know that. And there could be other reasons why a student may choose to complete a WASFA instead of a FAFSA. For example, transgender students, right? So the FAFSA currently doesn't account for transgender applicants or those whose gender does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. So although I personally find it a little bit problematic, some individuals suggest it is best to complete the FAFSA still using the name, usually the legal name, and gender marker on file with the Social Security Administration. But I will warn you that a mismatch between the Social Security Administration and the information provided in a FAFSA can complicate the financial aid application or trigger a rejection. Could be also a delay, additional documentation that the student may need to file. So if the student is planning on changing their name and gender markers, it's important for them to understand that it tends to be a long process. So encourage students to start early as possible, especially if they want to be able to reflect the changes in their FAFSA. This is just a suggestion. Of course, it's up to the student to decide how and what they want to do, what information to provide in their applications, but something for you, to talk with the student and advise on. So one other piece of information we wanted to share is about the Senate Bill 5194, which was passed last July of 2021, so over a year ago. And so this new bill makes it really easier for all Washingtonians, but including and especially undocumented students to meet residency requirements. And when we talk about residency in this context, we mean state residency, not immigration status, for in-state resident rate tuition and for in-state financial aid. So this bill removes the requirement that a person must earn a high school diploma or equivalent in the state of Washington. So now students can get their high school diploma, GED, or equivalent anywhere in the United States. And it also removes the requirement that a person must live in the state of Washington for 3 years prior to enrolling in college. The 3 years have now been reduced to 1 year. So remember, that was one of the questions in the poll. So, since July last year, students could have only resided in the state of Washington for a year prior to enrolling in college and still get in-state financial aid and in-state tuition rates. So this is really great news for students. During the pandemic, especially, we had many students and families moving, moving from other states coming into the state of Washington. So they only really need to have been living in the state for a year before enrolling in college. And you have some links here at the bottom of this slide in case you want to check the requirements and read a little bit further. Okay, so now we're going to talk about dependency status. So dependency status is important because based on the answers that the student provides to this questionnaire, they will be asked or not to provide information about their parent or parents. So the series of questions that students are going to be presented with is, was the student born before January 1st of 2000? Is the student married? Is the student enrolled in a graduate level program? Does the student have dependents? So, and that could be children of their own or individuals that they support. Is the student actively serving in the U.S. Armed Forces other than for training, right? So they're actually serving, not training. Or are they U.S. veterans? They're going to be asked if their parents are deceased, incarcerated, or if they spend any time in foster care since the age of 13. They're also going to be asked if they have been emancipated, that is when, emancipated or in a legal guardianship. And so these two scenarios means that a judge intervened or there was a court intervention by which the student, the individual, became either emancipated, which means legally and financially independent from any other individual. So they are really, for all intents and purposes, responsible for themselves legally and financially, or placed in a legal guardianship, meaning that they were their biological parents are no longer, if you want, financially and legally responsible for them, but instead a judge or a court assigned another adult to be the legal guardian, the legal responsible individual for the student. There's going to also be a series of questions about in case the student is an accompanied minor youth, if the student is at risk or is actually experiencing homelessness, or if the student is self-supporting, which in a way would be something equivalent to the emancipated status. So it's self-supporting, meaning the student is solely responsible for themselves financially. So if the student answers no to all of these questions, absolutely all of them, they would be considered dependent students, okay? Now, if the student answered yes to any of these questions, even if it's only one, they will be considered independent. And again, this determination is important because if the student answered no to all of the questions, they will be required to provide parent information, while if they responded yes to even one of these questions, they will not have to provide parent information. So I know there were some questions when some of you registered, wanted to ask questions about how to help students who are either in foster care or living with with another adult or have been removed from their family of origin, how they should complete the form. This questionnaire is very, very important. It's not the only place where they're going to be able to assert their circumstances, but this is the starting point. So it's very important to answer these questions accurately. And you can see this is our first orange bubble. This is a place where we see students making mistakes while answering these questions. So very important to help students understand the meaning of these questions.
Okay, now let's talk about what documents students will need to gather. Dependent students will need these documents for themselves and for their biological or adoptive parent. If the student's dependency status is independent, they won't have to gather these documents for their parents, only for themselves. Remember, we will provide you with a handout listing these documents, so don't worry about writing them down. Okay, so let's begin reviewing the documents. Students will need to have their Social Security card if they have one. If students are undocumented and don't have DACA, they will not be able to gather this for themselves and or for their parents if their parents are also undocumented. It is possible for undocumented students to have parents that have a Social Security. Their parents could be a permanent resident or have a different status. If students are completing their FAFSA, they should have their Social Security number on hand. If students are completing the FAFSA and their parents do not have a Social Security number, what they will do is enter all zeros in the fields requesting a Social Security number for their parents. Students should not use their parents' ITIN number or any other number. So to summarize this, students and parents of dependent students will need their Social Security number if they have one. For permanent residents, if students are permanent residents, they will need their alien registration number, also known as a green card number. And in regards to federal tax information or tax returns, students will need to gather their own 2021 tax return if they have one, and those of their parents if they are dependent students. Students and parents of dependent students will need records of untaxed income, for example, child support received, interest income, veterans non-education benefits, workers' compensation, Black lung benefits, untaxed portions of railroad retirement benefits, disability benefits, and untaxed portions of health savings account from the IRS Form 10, and this is found, you can find this information on the IRS Form 1040 listed on line 25. Students will also need to gather other financial documents containing information like cash, savings, and checking account balances from students and parents' bank accounts as of the day that they filed their FAFSA or WASFA. And any investments such as stocks, bonds, and real estate other than the home that the student lives in if their parent owns that home.
Thank you, Criselia. So let's talk about how do students log in or start the whole process of completing their FAFSA or their WASFA. So FAFSA filers will go to this email address and create what is called an FSA ID or Federal Student Aid ID, which is composed by username and a password. And who will need to get it? Well, the student who is applying, and then one of the parents, only one, if there are more than one parent present in the household, if and only if the student is dependent, and if the parent has a Social Security number. Okay, those are the only cases when the parent would have to get an FSA ID. What numbers should they use? Well, they should use the Social Security number to create the FSA ID, both for the student and the parent. And again, if the parent does not have a Social Security number, then they're not going to get an FSA ID. And instead, what they're going to do is sign the application, because this FSA ID is not only to log in into the application, but it's the electronic signature as well, is how students and parents are going to sign the FAFSA. But in the cases where the parent cannot get an FSA ID, they're actually going to print out a signature page, a physical signature page. They'll sign it and mail it to the address that is listed on the physical signature page that the student is going to sign in. I see a question, Carrie. We're going to get to that question later when we're talking about assets and information to report to on FAFSA and WASFA. Now, for students that are completing the WASFA, they are going to go to this address. And for those of you that have been doing this work for a long time, please notice that there is a new website address to go to. And the student will create a WASFA account. So the WASFA account is the equivalent to the FAFSA, the FSA ID if you want. So the student will get one, and one of the parents, again, if the student is dependent, will need to get an account, because again, it will be their way to access the application and sign the application. Now, what numbers should they use? Well, if the student has DACA, or if the parent also has DACA, they can use their social security number. So for those of you that you don't know, once an individual gets a DACA permit, they get a social security number or card as well. They can use their DACA number or their ITIN if they have one. If they don't have any of them, these numbers, then they can leave it blank. There's no problem about it. Now, a couple of tips for both FAFSA and WASFA filers. Parent and students need to use different email addresses and different phone numbers, because in a way, these two become the single one identifier, or what can differentiate one account from the other, okay? The other thing is that if a parent has multiple children, or if the parent, him or herself, has been a student and has gotten already an FSA ID or a WASFA account, they can use that same FSA ID or WASFA account to sign all of their children FAFSA or WASFA. They don't need to get a different one. Remember that each individual can only get one that is attached either to the social security number or the email address and phone number. The other thing is to make sure that before the request for the FSA ID or the WASFA account is submitted, they need to review everything to make sure everything is accurate, because making mistakes when there is a mismatch in the way that the name is written down and for example, the date of birth can really cause a lot of problems, and it can delay the process of getting a valid FSA ID or WASFA account. I see a question that I will respond now. So if a parent doesn't have a social security number, do they not need an FSA ID because they will not be eligible for FAFSA? So as a reminder, what matters is the student, the applicant immigration status to determine if they're completing a FAFSA or WASFA. So if the student is a US citizen or permanent resident and they're completing a FAFSA, and sorry, if the student is a US citizen or permanent resident, but the parent is not, the student still can complete a FAFSA. Okay, the parent's immigration status will not affect which form the student completes, even if they have a choice. So in this case, Erica, if the student is eligible to fill out a FAFSA, but the parents don't have a social security number, the student can still get to complete a FAFSA. Now, in that case, the parent, because they don't have a social security number, will not get an FSA ID. Does it make sense? Great. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, and later we'll add to that, the parent would sign the signature form and mail it in. That's how they would sign the student's application, just to add to that. Okay, so when should students apply for either the FAFSA or the WASFA? Most states have a priority deadline. Washington does not have one. It just says to file your FAFSA or WASFA as soon as possible. We recommend that students use November 1st as their priority deadline because financial aid runs out and schools award students on a first come, first served basis. We recommend that students complete their FAFSA and WASFA as closely to the opening date as possible. Remind them not to take longer than a month to complete their FAFSA and WASFA. Also remind them to check each school's individual deadline because their school may have a different priority deadline other than the November 1st deadline. So it's always important for students to check and mark it on their calendar to ensure that they receive financial aid. And as you see on the screen, the FAFSA and WASFA will open up on October 1st. And for those of you completing the FAFSA or for students completing the FAFSA, this is what the application is going to look like. You're going to see the option of either being a returning student or having a new use or being a new user. Students should click on new to FAFSA because this is the first time completing that they will be completing the FAFSA. Under new to FAFSA.gov, you will click the start here button and begin filling out and students will begin to fill out their new application. To log in, they will use their FSA ID. And for those completing the WASFA, they will go to the link listed on the top of the screen. Students will click on new user to set up an account and complete the application. After logging in, students will have the option of selecting the year they are filing the FAFSA or WASFA. It's very important that they pay attention because the screen is going to give them the option of completing one of two FAFSAs and WASFAs, either the current year or the following year. It's very easy to get confused and students can complete the wrong one. So students wanting aid for next fall will need to complete the 23-24 FAFSA or WASFA, not the 22 or 23 FAFSA or WASFA. So make sure that students are selecting the correct year. Although this year is 22-23, we're in the 22-23 academic year, students need to complete next year's FAFSA or WASFA because next year is when they're going to be in college and that's when they need financial aid. Hopefully this makes sense.
Okay, so what we want to show you here is a little bit the navigation of each form once students log in. So for students completing the FAFSA, they are going to see the menu on the top of the screen. You can see it is horizontal, and it's very important to pay attention where they're at because we see that it's very common that students will enter parent information in the student section and student information in the parent section. So looking at, the menu on top, is going, or to read, the label in the section they're in, like in this case, student information, personal information for student. There is a lot of repetition because students tend to make mistakes. It's a good way to keep yourself on track and see where you're at. Now for WASFA filers, that menu is actually vertical on the left-hand side. And so you can see all the different sections that the student will have to complete. And it's very clear in this one also. You can see here parent information. So up until they get to that section of parent information, they're completing or answering questions about themselves. It's again important to enter the right information under the right section to avoid the financial aid office having to make corrections, which can delay the process, maybe require the student to submit documentation to the financial aid office, and we want to kind of avoid that.
Students must be Washington residents to pay in-state tuition or get state financial aid. Both U.S. citizens and non-citizens can be Washington residents, including undocumented students. So this is not referring to an immigration status, but how long the student has lived in the state of Washington. As Maria mentioned, in 2021, the residency requirements were updated. WASFA will ask students to certify a residency affidavit that they will meet the following eligibility requirements. They will earn a high school diploma or diploma equivalent before the student's first college term, and maintain a primary residence in Washington for at least 12 consecutive months before their first college term, and promise that one of the following is true. They will file an application to become a permanent resident of the United States as soon as they're eligible to apply, and that they are also willing to engage in activities designed to prepare them for citizenship, or that they're a U.S. citizen, a U.S. national, or a U.S. permanent resident. This is how students certify that they're eligible for in-state tuition and state financial aid. Students will be completing this affidavit to answer the question in the chat. It's in the application, if that is what you're asking. Okay, so continue with the WASFA application. There's a question on the WASFA that will ask if the student has DACA or DACA status. If the student has ever had DACA, whether their status has expired or not, instruct the student to answer yes. This will determine the student's eligibility for state work study. Some colleges give students state work study to students that have an expired DACA.
Thank you, Criselia. So something that I forgot to mention at the beginning of the presentation is that the Department of Education has released what the 23-24 FAFSA is going to look like. So the screenshots you see for FAFSA are updated, but we do not have the updated screenshots for WASFA. So we don't know what type of changes they're going to be. So we're using last year's. If there are any changes, indeed, we'll know on October 1st, and we'll update this presentation. But for now, I want to make sure to mention that we don't know if WASFA is going to be making any, or if WASAC is going to make any changes to the WASFA application. Okay. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about this section here, that although we're showing you the screen for the FAFSA, the same questions are posed for in the WASFA application. So this is student information and is asking about the student's education. So the first one is going to be, what high school completion status is the student going to have by the time they start college, right? So because our presentations are mainly geared towards high school students, and a high school diploma or equivalent is required to receive financial aid at the college level. It's important that the student selects the right status, so either high school diploma or equivalent, right? The next question is, what college degree or certificate will the student be working on when they begin college the following year? And although it's fantastic for students to have long-term plans and think, after my four-year degree, I'm going to grad school, this question only is asking about the degree they will be pursuing next year, not 4 or 5 years down the line. So it's important, again, that they choose the right program. So it could be, a general associate's degree, a teaching certificate. It could be a first bachelor's degree or associate technical degree. So again, important to answer this question, thinking about next year, not further down the line. The next question will be, will the student have their first bachelor's degree before they start next year? And so if you're working with high school students, the answer here should always be no. Do keep in mind that a mistake here saying, yes, I already have a bachelor's degree, means that they will not qualify for a lot of the different financial aid programs, okay? So that's why it's important to pay attention. The next question, and this is one that we ask in the poll, so I want to make sure to pause and clarify. So the question here is, what will your college grade level will be when you start college next year? And so as you can see on the right-hand side, there are a whole bunch of options, right? But something we want to bring up to you is that if you're helping a high school senior, we really, really encourage you to ask the student to answer never attended college before first year, even if they've done dual enrollment or they have completed credits through the Running Start program, for example, right? So we know that many students complete 2 years of Running Start, so they finish their high school degree together with the first 2 years of a community college. We still encourage you to answer never attended college before. Let the financial aid office make the determination of what grade level the student is going to be considered at. So don't give it to the financial aid office. Let the financial aid office, together with the credentials office at the school the student will be attending, evaluate the credits that they have completed and determine what college level they will be in. Why is this important, or why are we emphasizing this? Because the program and year in college affect the type and amount of financial aid that a student can receive. So let, again, the school make that determination for the student, not the student doing it for themselves, okay? And let me know if that was not clear. The next question in this screen is, are you interested in being considered for work study? And although the screenshot, we were able to get marks no, our recommendation is always yes, 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 and yes. So their limited work study is one of the 4 different types of financial aid, right? So grants, scholarships, loans, and work study. Work study is pretty much 90% of the times is on-campus employment. The other 10% could be off-campus employment at a nonprofit organization or state agency, right? But work study is really a fantastic program that usually goes unused or unappreciated. And it's an opportunity for students not only to earn wages to maybe pay for their day-to-day expenses or maybe purchase their books, but also it's a great opportunity to really connect to the campus, to develop really good, solid relationships with supervisors that can become recommenders for scholarship, job applications, references as well. These jobs, the supervisors in these jobs understand that the priority for the student is actually school. And so when midterms, finals, or projects come around, they're going to be flexible around the hours the student works. Also, it can lead to, lifelong jobs, right? As I was telling you in the introduction, I never intended on building a career in financial aid, but my first work study job gave me, the opportunity to realize how a job in financial aid was so aligned with my belief in college access and equity. And it was something that I would have never considered before. So, it's a fantastic opportunity. So encourage your students to say yes, and they're not, just by saying yes here doesn't mean that they must take a job. But if they say no here and they change their mind later, they may have lost the opportunity, right? It's sort of a first come, first serve, and they are limited positions, so not all students get to use a work study award. So those are my 2 cents with this topic.
When filing the FAFSA or WASFA, students can send their FAFSA or WASFA information to 10 schools at a time. Students will have to select what their housing plans are. If students are unsure, instruct them to select on campus. If their plans change, they can inform the financial aid office. Usually students will need more funds to live on campus, and the school will need to know this information to award them accordingly. If students want to apply to more than 10 schools, once their FAFSA or WASFA is processed, they can log in and make corrections to their FAFSA or WASFA. From there, they can add more schools to send their information, and they'll sign and submit their FAFSA or WASFA again.
Okay, so let's move on to one of the $1 million questions when completing the FAFSA or the WASFA. Who is considered a parent? And I know that this may seem a little bit silly, like, do we not know who a parent is? But for FAFSA and WASFA purposes, the definition is very, very strict and limited. So when that question is posed in either one of these forms or any financial aid document, really they're referring only to a biological or legally adopted parent, okay? And if the biological or adopted parent has remarried, then the step parent to the custodial parent also has to be included. But having said this, anybody else, a grandparent, foster parents, legal guardians, older brothers or sisters, aunts, uncles are not considered parents. So they should never be, their information should never be entered in a FAFSA and a WASFA, unless of course they have legally adopted the student, right? And so their information should never be included in the FAFSA or the WASFA. So when it comes to parent questions, only think about biological or adopted parents. That's it, nobody else, okay? And we'll see some case studies on Thursday that will address this. Okay, so when the student gets to the FAFSA or the WASFA section, and then we are showing you what it looks like on the FAFSA, but it's the same again for the WASFA, right? The student is going to be given these options. It's going to be asked, are your parents living together? Either they're married or unmarried, but the question is, are they living together? Are the parents divorced or separated and the student lives with one parent more than the other? The other option will be, my parents are divorced or separated and I live with both parents equally. And the fourth question will be, I was legally adopted. So this follows a little bit to the dependency questions and the definition of parents to determine, in combination, those questions that we showed you earlier and this one, whose tax information or financial information to provide. So I remember that there was a question in the chat earlier today, is how the divorce comes into play, right? So we're going to look at it right now. This is what we're going to cover.
So this view collects the parents' marital status information for dependent students. The user will select their parents or parents' marital status as of the day they're completing the FAFSA or WASFA. The options are never married or unmarried and both legal parents are living together, or married or remarried, or divorced or separated, and then finally widowed. Students will need to enter the date the status they selected started.
And the same thing is going to apply for WASFA filers. We just wanted to see how both screens look, but it's very much the same options, parents' marital status and the day that status became active. And another orange bubble. One section when we see sometimes students assume that because the parents live together, they are legally married. That's not always the case. So important to find out exactly what the status is. Okay, so when it comes to parent information, again, students may find themselves in 3 different scenarios. Okay, so let's see how students should respond to them when filing their FAFSA or WASFA. So the first one, as we saw the questions, right, of the parent situation. The first one, the answer may be from the student, yes, I'm able to provide parent information. So there's going to be, you know, a checkbox that they can check on the FAFSA or the WASFA saying, I will provide parent information. So there is no follow-up other than providing that information in subsequent questions on the FAFSA or the WASFA. The second one is, I'm actually unable to provide parent information. And so the student will have to check mark that box followed by these other two boxes that show up in the application. I have a special circumstance and I'm unable to provide parent information. And I understand that because I'm in this circumstance, I need to follow up with the financial aid administrator after I submit my FAFSA or my WASFA. Okay, what students need to know when they are in this situation and they check these boxes is that the student aid report, when it comes back, it will not have an expected family contribution calculated. This is something that the financial aid office or administrator will have to hand calculate after the student follows up with supporting documentation, because there are a wide range of circumstances, right, of why the student cannot provide parent information. Some examples are if the parents are incarcerated, or, you know, if there's only one parent in the picture, the parent is incarcerated. If the student had to leave their home because it was no longer safe, so that's why they don't have access to parent information, or if they don't know, you know, they don't know the parents' whereabouts, right? So those are three circumstances that are considered special, under which the student would not be able to provide parent information. So they would check these boxes and follow up with the financial aid office with documentation attesting to their circumstances. The third scenario is that the parents maybe are unwilling to provide parent information, or they are unable to provide parent information, but not due to a special circumstance as defined by federal regulation. So let me give you a couple of examples. For if, for example, the student is not living with the parent because they chose to do that, right? Or if the parents are not providing financial, the student lives with the parents, but the parents are not providing financial support, or the parents are refusing to provide financial information or to contribute towards their education, or if the parents are not claiming the student in their taxes. Those are not considered special circumstances, unfortunately. The financial aid world is seeing that more of a choice rather than an actual circumstance. The student doesn't have a choice. There may be 1,000 reasons why the student doesn't have a choice, but that is sort of the way, the black and white way that financial aid looks at circumstances. Do remember, there are always ways to petition and appeal with the financial aid office, but at face value, while completing the FAFSA for the WASFA, these are the options the student will have. Now, if the student chooses this option, unwilling or, you know, to provide parent information, and they do not have a special circumstance, what they need to know is that there is very limited financial aid available to them, and that very few, and I mean it when I say very few, financial aid offices may consider an appeal, especially if it's the step parent who refuses to provide financial information for them to complete their FAFSA for their WASFA. So important to remember these three distinctions, and important to know what the follow-up, if any, needs to be for these group of students. I see there is a question. Hold on. Oh no, it's an old question, but I do want to address how divorce plays into asset questions. So 1 second, Carrie. There's one more slide that we'll cover that is going to help answer that question. Sorry.
Okay, so what's important in this section is parents' social security number. So if parents do not have a social security number, remember students will only enter zeros. They will not enter an ITIN number or any other number. Doing so will cause issues and delays.
And this is, you see another orange bubble here. Sometimes we see students entering ITIN numbers. Do not have them just enter zeros. Okay, Carrie, here this is going to give us the answer you asked earlier on. So whose parent, now that we have determined the parent's marital status, we need to think about, okay, which parent information are we going to report on the FAFSA for the WASFA? So if the parents are living together, regardless of the marital status, okay, married, unmarried, separated, divorced, but they're living together under the same roof, then the student is going to report information for both parents, okay? Now, if the parents are not living together, you're going to report information about the parent with whom the student lives more than half the time, okay? And then if the student splits their time equally, so 50-50, then the student is going to report information on the parent who provides more than half of the financial support to the student, okay? So the first line of question is, who does the student live with more than 50% of the time? If it's a clear cut, well, I spend 90% of the time with parent one, then you'll provide only information about parent one. Tax information, so, tax information, W-2, assets, investments, child support received, all of it, okay? It will go there. Now, if it's equal time, then you're going to report information about the parent that provides more than half of the financial support. And if the parents are divorced, but the parent that either the student lives with more than 50% of the time, or the parent that provides more than 50% of the support is remarried, then the student will have to report information about that parent and the step parent. And I don't want you to get confused. In the slide, we use the word custodial parent. It has nothing to do with custody agreements or anything. This is like, we wanted to use a word that distinguishes parent from any other parent. So this is the parent with whom the student lives most of the time, or the parent that provides most of the financial support, okay? So once you have identified which parent you're reporting on, you will report all the information again about their income, their assets, any additional money that they may have received through divorce settlements, right? And investments, all of it, okay? And remember, as of the day the student, so balance is as of the day the student completes the FAFSA or the WASFA. So what can students do if their parents do not help provide their information, other than selecting that they cannot provide information on FAFSA? Excellent question, Erica. So what we usually do is that, sorry, give me 1 second here to organize my thoughts on how I want to explain these. In this situation, the first line of action is to talk, we tell the student to talk to one of us, or a college advisor, or a guidance counselor, any of us, so that we can have a conversation with the student, or even with the parent, right? So that we can explain the importance of them providing this information. Parents may be uncomfortable sometimes sharing financial information with the student, or may not know the importance of providing this information when it comes to funding a college education. So it's important for us to put them at ease, especially for FAFSA filers. We can tell them about the IRS data retrieval tool, which we'll cover in a minute, that if they use that tool, the information is, transferred, and you don't see the information that is transferred, right? So it remains confidential. So neither the student, the parent, or any of us will be able to see it. Only a financial aid administrator would be able to see it. So just trying to dispel any myths they may have. Now, we do know, and we do encounter sometimes step parents that, refuse to do it because they don't feel that their stepchildren are their responsibility. And it's a very unfortunate and sad circumstance. but that is, it is what it is. As I mentioned, in my years of experience, there have been very, very few instances where I have seen a financial aid office actually accept a petition not to include step parent information and still provide financial aid to the student. So that should never be a route that you don't explore just because we have seen low incidences of it. So that would be the recommendation, but be realistic with the student that maybe their choice will be having to do, a good effort in their search for private scholarships, that they should certainly consider attending a school that is, that is really affordable, like starting the first 2 years at a community college so that it's easier to get, paid with private scholarships or some institutional money. I will tell you that students in this group can still borrow from the unsubsidized loan program, which is not really the greatest, but it's an option at least, and it's limited in terms of the amount, right? Because a freshman student can only borrow up to $3,500 in unsubsidized loans. So you can see how limited it is. So again, it's an unfortunate situation, but appeals should be considered, and doing serious private scholarship searches should be another strategy. Okay, let's move on. Oh, okay, and this is very important, and I think it was a question in the poll also. It does not matter who claims the student in their taxes, okay? Remember that what matters is who the student lives with more than 50% of the time, or who is the parent that provides more than 50% of the financial support, okay? So it doesn't matter. And even if you get to that second question, who provides financial support, and it's equal, still 50-50, then the parents get to decide who they want to report. If that's the case, we recommend that they remain consistent so they don't change, like they don't flip one year to the other. Oh, this year we provide information on this parent, next year on the other one. It can be a flag for the financial aid office, so try to stay consistent. Oh, okay. Give me 1 second here. Oh, it's me again. Okay. So let's talk very quickly about who lives in the household, right? So there are two questions in the FAFSA, the WASFA, how many individuals live in the household and how many of those are attending college. So in general, students will have to enter information about themselves, their parent or parents, any other siblings that for which the parents provide 50% or more of their support, and any other individual that lives in the household and that the parents provide 50% or more of their support. Okay, so this is what it looks like for FAFSA filers. This is what it looks like for WASFA filers. And I want to explain a couple things in terms of, it seems pretty straightforward with the parents and the children, but there may be other individuals the parents support, right? So very important again to remember that the parents or the parent need to be providing 50% of more of the support of those who live at home. So it could be, for example, I am the student and I live with my two parents, and we also live with my grandmother, right? So I may think, okay, yeah, it's 4 of us at home and I'm the only student. So I'm going to report 4 in the household, 1 in college. But now my grandmother works and she pays her portion of the rent and utilities and buys her food. So really my parents are not providing 50% of her support. So if that's the case, I cannot count my grandmother in the number of household members. Okay. A couple more things for you to know. Students may include an unborn child. So if any household member is pregnant, they are able to report that unborn child because it will have to be, he or she will have to be supported the following year. You cannot include living significant others unless, again, the head of household or house are providing 50% or more of their support. And then you cannot include parents in the number of individuals attending college. That is a discussion we can have about if it's fair or not. Not in my opinion, but it's the reality, okay? So parents cannot be included in that number. Again, this is an area where we see students making miscounting family members. So make sure to help them through figuring out who to count. I think there is a question. What happens when the parent who the child lives with is not the primary financial provider? So again, the first line of the information that matters, the first question that you ask is, who does the student live with most? And so if it's parent A, which is the parent the student lives with, you provide information at parent A. And then if the student ends up spending the same amount of time, then you go to the second line of question, which is who is providing the most support, okay? I don't know if that helps or not. Okay.
Students are able to skip certain income and asset questions if they qualified for a means tested benefit listed on the screen. Dependent students are eligible for the simplified needs test if the annual income of the student's parents is less than $50,000 and they qualify for means tested federal benefits. This is if anyone in the parent's household receives certain federal means tested benefits during either of the last 2 years. Also, if parents didn't file a Schedule 1 or only filed a Schedule 1 to report unemployment compensation, educators' expenses, or an IRA deduction, the student then qualifies for simplified needs path, meaning it allows students and parents to have assets included from consideration in calculating the expected family contribution. Next slide. The FAFSA has a useful tool called the IRS data retrieval tool. Not all can use it, but some can. Rather than manually entering this information, students can ask the IRS to do a data dump into the FAFSA. This makes the FAFSA filing process quick and easy. And as I mentioned, this is only for the FAFSA filers. So unfortunately, WASFA filers cannot use this tool. Let's review who can use the IRS data retrieval tool. So it's students and parents who have a Social Security number, those who have filed a 2021 federal tax return with no corrections. So if there were any corrections, they cannot use the IRS data retrieval. And then those whose marital status did not change since they last filed, and those that have filed as single or married jointly. If a parent filed as head of household, they cannot use the IRS data retrieval. So if students are able to use it, we recommend that they use it because it's fast, it's accurate, and it will reduce the chances of students being selected for verification.
Okay, so who can use the data retrieval tool? As you can see on the screen, and as Criselia mentioned, is individuals that have valid Social Security numbers, those that file 2021 taxes, but they haven't made any corrections or amendments since they filed, those whose marital status hasn't changed since December of 2021, and those that have filed either a single or married filing jointly. So individuals that have filed as head of household, for example, unfortunately are not able to use this tool. So again, who cannot use it? So those married filing separately. So married filing separately cannot, because there are two tax returns and the tool cannot transfer information from two different tax returns. Those that file, as I mentioned, as head of household, Those that are unmarried and living together, which in most cases would have filed separately. Those that file using an ITIN number, those that file foreign tax returns, or those who are victims of identity theft. So those are the two groups that can and cannot actually use the IRS data retrieval tool. I know that they're looking to make improvements to it in the next few years, but for now, this is what it is. Okay, sorry. So once we get to the parent financial information, and again, I'm sorry, we are talking about FAFSA filers. Once the student answers all these questions, the application itself is going to tell them if they qualify to use the IRS data retrieval tool, or if it's recommended that they use. So you can see it here in the middle that it says recommended IRS data retrieval tool, which is very handy, so nobody has to make the decision. So if they do and they choose to use it, they can link to the IRS by clicking on proceed to the IRS. Do notice that there is another button that says no thanks, I will do the work myself, but we recommend that you use that this handy tool. The second one, so once you click on proceed to the IRS, it's going to tell you, okay, you're going to a government site, and is going to ask you to log in into the IRS data retrieval tool using one of the parents' FSA ID, if it's there, okay? So this should make things relatively easy to retrieve. And the third piece is once they have made a match between the parent and the IRS record on the parent, is that it's going to pull the information and ask you once again to confirm that you want to transfer the information. So you will click mark, you will click on the transfer. Oh, sorry. You will click on the button that says transfer, and then all the information will be moved over into the application. It's going to look like this, transferred from the IRS. Remember that I mentioned this is something that we can use when talking to parents about keeping their information confidential and safe, right? So this information will not be viewable to anybody but financial aid administrators.
If information needs to be entered manually on the FAFSA or WASFA, make sure to review the instructions under the question. Each question has instructions on where to find the information on the tax return. For example, on the FAFSA screenshot, you can see that it says IRS Form 1040, line 11. You can also click on the question mark to get additional guidance about the information that you need to enter in that specific field. Reach out to us if there's something that is confusing. I know that tax questions can be very confusing when completing these applications. If the line in the tax form has no data in it, then enter 0 in the corresponding field of the FAFSA or WASFA application.
Okay, a word about the next slide before I showed it to you. It's going to be overwhelming. But we want to provide you with all the information you can possibly be asked when completing it. You know, the reality is that I would say 85% of the time we work with low-income families. So there isn't that many assets or additional financial information or untaxed income that we need to report. But the reality is that 15% of them or so will have additional financial information that they will have to be reported. It would take too much training right now to cover every one of these specifically. We wanted to include a slide so that you can go back and refer to it. And even if this doesn't explain it for you, you can always come to us and ask us. But we want you to know that there is additional financial information not contained in the tax return that the student will be asked and may have to report on. Okay. The same thing for the next slide for reporting college saving accounts. Not many students do, but some of them do. And so all I want to tell you right now, because I'm not going to go in depth about this, is that in general, college saving accounts have to be reported if they are in the name of the, if they are in, if the owner, excuse me, is the student or the parent of the student, okay? And there are many caveats and things, so we'll talk, you come to us and we'll explain to you how you will be reporting it. We're running a little bit out of time as usual because there is so much information we're throwing at you. We want it on the presentation so that you can refer to it. And again, you can always come back to us and we'll answer any questions you may have. Very quickly, something new for the next year is a demographic survey, which is optional. So students are not forced to answer these questions. Students can decline to answer, but they're questions about gender, transgender, despite what we told you earlier about students choosing to complete the WASFA instead of the FAFSA, because this is all there is here. So there are no guarantees that because there is a question here that there may not be a mismatch with the Social Security Administration. And ethnicity. Again, this is optional. This year is going to be sort of a trial basis that they're including it. And I think that there is a period for us to still make comments to the Department of Ed on what we think about adding these questions. So if it's still open and you feel very strongly about it, I recommend you let your voice be heard. Okay. Quickly, we got to the end, signatures. I'm going to talk about FAFSA signatures. So the student will have 3 options here to sign, either using the FSA ID, printing a signature page. Remember, this option is for those individuals that do not have an FSA ID or they are eager to submit their application, but there is a mismatch. They haven't been able to resolve with their FSA ID. Or if you're sending a print, a signature page, then you want to submit without signatures, right? Because the signature is going to go in the mail. The application is going to arrive electronically faster than the signature page in the mail. So students can have all these options to sign their FAFSA. Remember that if the parents don't have a social security number, or if they're unable to resolve a name, social security number, date of birth, right, and they want to submit the application, as I said, they can do so. Or if they forgot their login credentials, are unable to retrieve their FSA ID, they can also use the signature page and the submitting without signatures. Not really recommended, but an option, right? For those that will be using a signature page, we recommend they keep a copy, because sometimes that copy gets lost in the mail and they may need to send it again. So it's good to have a copy and mail it to the address provided, right? So if you choose this option, the print a signature page, a page is going to pop up like a separate window. You print it and you sign it and you mail it. Goodness. Okay. Once the student has chose how they're going to sign, if they decided to use their FSA ID, it's going to look like this, right? And so you see here, provide parent signature. You will click there, you will enter the FSA ID. Once they sign it electronically, you still need to hit the button of submit my FAFSA form now. So sign and submit is not just sign and ends there, it's sign and submit. Both items need to be done in order for the application to go through.
And this is how students know that they submitted their application successfully. Once the application is processed successfully, this view will display a congratulations message and information about what happens next.
So this is what an processed application will look like online. It's going to say, see application receipt date, process date, and then it will calculate the expected family contribution, which is crucial because this is the number that financial aid offices across the United States use to determine what type and amount of financial aid to provide. In this case, the student, the closest to zero, the better. And so a zero EFC means that the student may be eligible to receive $6,895 in Pell Grant. The letter will only tell the student the possible eligibility for Pell Grant and loans, nothing else. But that doesn't mean they may not qualify for additional state aid, institutional aid, private aid. So tell the student not to despair. And then a heads up. I think this is a repetition or no? Here, sorry, there is more information in case the student needs to make corrections, right? Here's where their instructions on how to make corrections. In case the student receives the student aid report on paper in the mail, this is what it looks like. Okay, it's the same, it's the equivalent. This cover letter is super important and the student should read it closely because it's going to give the students instructions in terms of follow-ups. So in this case, you will find the EFC on the top right corner. And so if the EFC number is followed by a C code, as you can see here, it means that there's something that needs to be corrected in the application. Sometimes there is conflicting information. Other times, instead of a C or in addition to the C, you will see an asterisk. The asterisk denotes that the student has been selected for verification. So immediately have them gather, tax information to provide to the financial aid office. Okay, so important to read this cover letter closely.
WASFA filers will see their student aid report after submitting their WASFA. We recommend students carefully review their answers before they submit their application. This is a way to confirm that the information they entered is true and correct. They must open and preview the form. To do this, students will click on View Form and a tab will open up with the information. Some key information that students will see is their EFC at the top and the schools where they want their information sent to. After reviewing their information, they will check the box acknowledging their information is true and correct, then click on the next button. Next slide, please. Now let's discuss how students sign the WASFA. They will be typing their first name, last name, password for their account, current city where they're completing the electronic signature and state. If a student is a dependent student, they will need to invite their parents to sign the application. Their application will be incomplete until one parent signs it. Next slide. Again, students only need to invite one parent to sign the application. Students will enter the selected parent's email address and click on Generate Portal Access and e-signature email, as you can see on the screen. The parent will receive an email with a link. They will click on that to complete the process to electronically sign the WASFA application. The link is live for 72 hours, so that's 3 days. If it expires, students can send another invite to the parent. And here you can see an example of what the parent will receive in their email. You can see Parent Portal has a link. After the parent clicks on this, they will be presented with the same questions the student had to answer to create their account. The parent will answer these questions for themselves. Once they answer the questions and create their account, they will review the information that the student entered on the application and electronically sign the student's application. This will change the status of the student's WASFA application from incomplete to complete, and students will be able to see the date that their parents signed it, as you can see on the screen.
Great, thank you, Criselia. Okay, we're almost to the end, I promise. So avoiding common mistakes are, in the areas that are listed here on the screen are all items that we have covered throughout the presentation. So make sure that students understand they need to complete their FAFSA WASFA and complete it early and accurately. to check and double check before they hit the submit button to avoid delays, you know, in their financial aid, in receiving a financial aid. Also, answering accurately means that the skip logic is going to work accurately, and so some questions may not pop up for them. So very important to do this and remind students to do it. Special circumstances, we talked about how to address some special circumstances within the FAFSA for the WASFA, right? So what happens when a parent doesn't have social security numbers, or, you know, making sure that the marital status and tax filing match. And then how students can answer questions to denote their status on the form, right? And so some of them are there experiencing homelessness, self-supporting, all those. So these can be addressed within the FAFSA, the WASFA. Now, there are other circumstances that will require, in addition to completing the FAFSA, the WASFA, to follow up with the financial aid office. One of them is when the student is unable to locate the parent. Another one is when they're staying with family members or friends, and this is an informal arrangement. So there hasn't been a court intervention, okay? So the student will have to submit a petition that usually involves the student writing a letter explaining their circumstances, a third party also attesting to the circumstances. This could be a family member, it could be the McKinney-Vento liaison, it can be you know, a supervisor, a coach, anybody that is aware of the circumstances. And in addition to that, we always recommend that the student provide some sort of supporting documentation, right? Documentation that can support their claim. So, for example, showing some sort of bill that will show that their address matches that of, you know, another family member, for example. And we can talk one-on-one later. We hope to put together actually a presentation just on petitions. For now, we just have a PowerPoint and some resources, but we can talk to you one-on-one. The other special circumstance I wanna mention very quickly is in cases when there have been changes in family income since they last filed taxes. So remember that to complete the 23-24 FAFSA for WASFA, students will submit information about their 2021 financials, right? Now, since then, circumstances may have changed to the for the family, right? So the student can submit, the family can submit an appeal with the financial aid office with the expectation that the financial aid office may make an adjustment to income to reduce the expected family contribution. The other type of special circumstance, it would be when there are additional unexpected and astronomical at times expenses the family incurred. So they have an unexpected family contribution that they can't really, it's not realistic for the family to really contribute because they have had these additional expenses like medical expenses, you know, car repairs, or, you know, if the car breaks down or they were in a car accident and now they had to replace their car. This was also common during the pandemic when families lost wages, or they had to get, for example, computers, Wi-Fi, so that the family could work and attend school from home, right? So those are additional expenses that can be included in a petition, okay? I don't know if I said this, but suddenly it pops in my head. This dependency override petition I was referring to is when the FAFSA for the WASFA automatically tells the student you are considered dependent, but the student can't access parent information. So the goal of this petition is for the financial aid office to make the student independent so they don't have to provide parental information. So anyway, I know this is super fast. I apologize. We have a handout that looks something like this, where we list the circumstance. We tell you if you address it within the FAFSA for the WASFA, or you address it with the financial aid office, or both, and what is the desired outcome of that petition or that action, okay? We also recommend that you use this website called Form Swift that really helps the student. They walk you through the putting together of a petition. So from writing the letter to providing supporting documentation. We are going to provide you a link to the handout. We have all the information in the Financial Aid Hub. Do remember that right now we only have the student section. We are actively working on the practitioner section where we will upload recordings, PowerPoints, and all these resources we created or vetted for you. Okay, almost done. Hang in there.
So after students submit their WASFA or FAFSA, they will want to review their student aid report. For FAFSA filers, their application will be processed in 3 to 7 days. If students provided a valid email address on their FAFSA form, they will receive an email with instructions on how to access an online copy of their student aid report. They will want to make sure that everything is correct and also determine if they need to make any changes. For WASFA filers, the WASFA application will be available to colleges, to the college's financial aid office within 24 hours after filing. Remind students to provide any missing signatures, whether it's their signature or the parent signature. If parents are, or if their application is missing a parent signature, have the student remind their parents to sign, whether electronically or mail in the signature page. Have students contact the financial aid office in case they have any questions or they need students to complete additional paperwork. Students should check their email and college portal every week so they don't miss any deadlines. And if students need to submit an appeal, make sure that they start gathering those documents and information. And then we always want to remind students not to forget to apply every year for financial aid that they will be attending college.
Thank you, Criselia. Okay, news for next year. So if you are working with college students, let me tell you something about verification. So there are a couple of waivers that have happened during the pandemic that looks like they will continue at least for the 22-23 year. We are expecting that maybe they will end soon, but verification is one of them. So the most complex verification, there are 3 different types of verifications, right? So 3 different types because they are verifying different type of information. The most complex one is the income, right? The income piece. So that one has been eliminated during the pandemic. Now, one thing to say about that is that if there are gross inconsistencies in the application, the financial aid office may still need to clarify some of the information. But verification 1, which is the income information and assets, that has gone away. The 2 verifications that stayed in place is in cases of identity thefts to verify that the student has actually completed high school or equivalent. Okay. Now, that's for the current year college students. Now, for the 23-24 academic year and FAFSA and WASFA, some changes that have happened is that the selective service question has been eliminated. The drug conviction question has been eliminated. Yay. The gender, race, and ethnicity questions have been added. And remember, these are elective. They're not mandatory. Then another thing for you to know is that now incarcerated students have their own FAFSA and also now qualify for Pell Grant. So if you happen to work with an incarcerated student, do know that there is a separate FAFSA form that they complete and that they can actually qualify for Pell Grant. I think this is a great win for incarcerated students, and with also the drug conviction question going away. Now, there's also going to be new guidance on which parent information to include. So there's going to be new text and infographic to follow, and revised guideline for students experiencing homelessness or special circumstances. I haven't seen it exactly yet, but that's what I read. And the other thing to know is that the mobile app is being retired. So for you to know. The last thing on news that I wanted to share with you is that the 23-24 web demonstration will be available September 25th. So I have already signed up, so I may be able to make any changes to this presentation. what else do I want to tell you? That eligible students and parents may use the IRS data retrieval tool to transfer. Oh, we talked about this. I don't know why I have it here as new. Sorry. So some states, in case you work with students in other states other than in Washington, or they ask you, they may be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool to populate their state financial aid. So it's similar to, I hope that the state of Washington does it too, but so individuals that complete the WASFA being able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. This is not the case for Washington. It is for other states. I'm just hoping that it becomes a reality here. Also, for parents that have multiple students and are completing FAFSA for multiple of their children, they may be able to transfer information from one FAFSA to the other. So that's also a new thing for the next year. I don't know what it looks like, so I can't tell you. Hopefully on the 25th, I'll learn. And then, what else am I forgetting here? This is not new also, but I think that they're adding information. When students are entering, those 10 colleges or universities that they want the FAFSA and WASFA information to be sent to, usually there is an option for students to compare really key performance indicators for these institutions that I think it's such a great tool that goes underused, and it's a great conversation starter for you to have with students when you look at how much financial aid students receive on average attending the school, or what is the graduation rate for students attending those schools, or transfer rates, right? It gives you really rich information that is important for students to think about when they're choosing where to attend. So that's important to know. Erica, if students have lived in the state of Washington for less than 12 months, then they're not going to qualify for in-state tuition. So they need to be prepared to be charged at higher rates. Thank you so much for participating and asking questions and answering questions. And we look forward to seeing you on Thursday morning.